Ade Adepitan, thank you so much for joining me today.
No worries. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me this, sport and mental health, mental and well-being, so closely linked. How's it been for you over the last couple of years with the pandemic? And what's it felt like to return to basketball with the London Titans?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nick. So I think you learn a lot about yourself in times of adversity like this. And I really got to grips and understood, how the pandemic was impacting people around me. Because I'd left basketball. I mean, I still play for fun, but it isn't my main thing. I work in TV, I write, I've got so many other things. And basketball was there for me, and it was definitely a passion, and I missed not having it there. But one of my teammates, he had a small business where he was a wheelchair repairman. It was a wheelchair repair service. And he would travel around, and he was really invaluable. Like, I'd call him when I'd travel off on journeys, and my chair had been busted when I'd come back from climbing up a volcano or dropping my chair down the side of a mountain, and I'll be like, hey, I'll fix this, Jack. And when the pandemic hit, he couldn't work. His business was completely shut down. And then when the restrictions eased slightly, immediately I called him, because I was like, I need to get some repairs on my chairs. It's squeaking, it's going all over the place. And he turned up, and I was having a chat with him and saying, how are things? How are you? And he said to me, he's had the most awful time. And he said the reason being was, during the pandemic, his parents lived in Spain. He'd just broken up with his girlfriend. And he said wheelchair basketball was his main outlet, his main social outlet. It was where his family was. And because his outer family was, and because we could no longer do it, he lost that. And he said at one stage, he didn't speak to anyone apart from the woman at the cashier woman at the Morrison's till for 4 weeks.
No.
4 weeks. And he was saying how much he missed basketball. And it just made me think, I mean, I was lucky because I've got my family, and we live in a nice house and stuff. And I was able to really, just have a time where I could wind down. But I felt this so much that I had to write an article about it for a disability magazine, just to say, how the pandemic was affecting people in different ways. And it was just, it really broke me to hear how much of a hard time he was having, and made me think how many other people were having that and feeling that sort of isolation.
How is he now? I should ask.
Yeah, he's great now, because the business is up and running, and he gets to go about. But I think what he really brought out was the fact that ultimately, as human beings, we are a social species. We need interaction. We need to meet people. We need to talk to people, and just only seeing some person who you barely know at a supermarket cash till, and that being your only contact for a month. It's just, I mean, that's going to lead people into spiraling into some sort of, mental place. I mean, I'm fortunate because I keep myself busy. I can write, I would go out and do loads of fitness. I'm always constantly doing stuff, but I do need people. I do need to chat.
You mentioned television. Your role as an interviewer on RGK Wheel had you speaking to a host of incredible Paralympians. Tell me what inspires you about the mindset of these elite athletes, and tell me kind of how you feel it's evolved.
Getting to speak to the athletes on RGK's Wheel Talk podcast. I like what they did there. Wheel Talk was like, it was fun, because a lot of it, I was speaking to a lot of guys who were either friends, teammates, or and it kind of feels embarrassing sometimes, but people who grew up watching me as a basketball player or as a TV presenter, and who looked up to me, and it was just fascinating getting into all of these different mindsets. Speaking to a guy called Patrick Anderson, who's arguably seen as the greatest ever wheelchair basketball player of all time, who I competed against many times, and chatting to him, interviewing him. And what was really fascinating about interviewing Patrick was when you play him, he felt like this invincible, gladiator on the basketball court who just, was just unbelievably talented. And then chatting to him on a one-to-one basis, you felt his vulnerability, how much insecurity this guy had about his game, and about, he felt that he was carried by other players in his team, and that he was the less intelligent one, and he was like this guy who was going around just through his physical prowess being really good. And you would never have got that. I would never have got that just unless I'd spoken to him one-to-one through these chats. Because as athletes, we are told to keep this armor all the time. We're told to never show any weakness. And in these talks, I talk to people not just about sport, about their personal life, about disability, about what techniques, what skills, what things they've learned to help them overcome some of these traumatic accidents that they've had. Because a lot of them, end up in wheelchairs through really traumatic incidents, and they've had to pick up the pieces of their lives and then go into a sport, into a cutthroat world where it's about being the best, and just trying to dig in and drill into that mindset, and drill into that mindset of my peers and friends that I've played against, was fascinating. Also speaking to some of the women, the female disabled athletes, and talking about what is it like to have a disability and be a woman. How does that work? The way the world is set up, we tend to able-bodied people look at people with disabilities in a way like we're almost second-class citizens. I know I mean, I'm lucky because of my profile, but for many of us, it's tough. You get looked down upon. And for women, it's even tougher. And I was like, what was it like to rebuild your life after that traumatic accident? She was it was Sophie Carrigal, and she's a very good-looking woman, and she's really determined that on her Instagram, because I looked at her Instagram posts, and she was very body confident. She would be wearing bikinis and showing herself doing workouts with her scars visibly shown. And I was really fascinated about that, because it took me a long time to be comfortable on TV to show my disability, to show my leg, or to wear shorts, because I was embarrassed about it. And she said to me, her scars basically are the things that saved her life. So for her to see those scars feels empowering for her. And I find that fascinating, drilling into other people's mindsets.
And where do you think we as a society are in that journey of acceptance, I suppose? How are we doing?
From when I was growing up, it's night and day in terms of the way people treat people with disabilities. Because we're more prominent. You see us out on TV. I mean, it might only be every 4 years for the Paralympics that you see the bulk of it, but generally people know more of disabled athletes. In my time, if I was to go out on the street and ask a random person, name 3 disabled athletes, most people wouldn't be able to name one. But now most people know David Weir, Johnny Peacock, Ellie Simmons, Sarah Story. These are household names. And that's made a difference in one respect. But I think there is still a long way to go. There are still obstacles that society throws in front of us, because the moment I open my front door and go out my house, I face challenges. I face uneven curbs. I face a transport system that doesn't work for me. I face buildings that are not accessible for me. So I've got obstacles before I can even start my life, before I can even be me and do what I want to do. I have to overcome all of these barriers that society puts in front of me. And I always say this, the only way things are going to change is when people are prepared to fight for things that they do not necessarily benefit from directly. So, you as an able-bodied person, if you go to your local shop and you see it's got a load of stairs, if you go and then challenge the people, then say, hold on, what about someone with a disability? Or what about a mother with a pram? How are they supposed to come in this place? Even though it doesn't necessarily affect you, when people are ready to have that empathy and be able to take that on board, that's when we start changing, and I think that's what it needs, because I can scream and holler and shout till I'm whatever color in the face about the discrimination and the inaccessibility of the world out there. But people will just look at me as an angry disabled person and they'll say, he would say that, wouldn't he? But if you did it, then it makes a difference.
You've been on the front lines of climate change discussions. Where are we with that?
I knew climate change would be when I started to tackle the issue of climate change and began my documentary series. I knew it was going to be a difficult one and challenging one. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey. I'm so passionate about it. I think it's so important. I think it's the most important topic that the human race has ever faced. The reason why I made my series of documentaries, and I've been challenged about it a lot, by certain people said, well, you're part of the problem, you're traveling around the world to do this and, and all of that. And my answer is, the reason why I made these documentaries is, for years, we have known, or decades, we've known about climate change. And for decades, we've had scientists, we've had people who've talked about it. And it's basically all been around the science. It's been around what is going to happen, the doom and gloom, the worst case scenarios, which is really important. The science is so important on climate change that we understand it and we get to grips with it. But I think the only reason why the science is important is because of the way it impacts us as people, as a race. So I felt I needed to go out there and meet the people on the front line, the people who are every day being affected by climate change, people who are losing their livelihoods, losing their homes, losing family members because of climate change, because that's how we connect with the story. For someone to tell you, oh, the ice caps are melting and the sea levels are rising by a millimeter or centimeters every year, or we're getting hotter by this temperature, people kind of think, well, yeah, but it's not affecting me immediately. But if you see a farmer who's losing everything, his animals are dying. If you see a young woman who looks like you, who's like your daughter or like your mother or like your wife, who's lost her whole island because of sea level rise. If you go to Bangladesh and you see the millions of people who are being displaced by sea level rise, then I think we connect. And that's why I wanted to do it, because I think that's my strength. My strength is meeting people, speaking to people and getting their stories and giving them a voice. And I thought it was so important that I had to do this. And it was, don't get me wrong, this was difficult. Physically, this was one of the most challenging series I've ever made. Climbing up mountains, dragging my chair through snow and through mud. It's not the feature of the show. It's something that's in the background, but it's the things that I had to do to get to see these people and to get to hear these stories and to get to understand what it was about. But it's so important. Our children's future depends on this. I don't want for us, they talk about the generation that fought in the war as the heroic generation. They also talk about the baby boomers who changed the way of life economically in the country, in these countries and in the West. But I don't want my generation in decades to come to be looked at as the selfish generation, the generation who knew and had all the solutions but refused to change.
What do you say to people who just feel a sense of helplessness because there's so much? How do they kind of focus their attention on one particular thing or another?
I guess for me, it's easier as an athlete because I take my sports mentality into this. And the way I put this into context is, when I was first trying to get into the Paralympic squad, if I was and wanting to win a medal at the Paralympics, if I was to look back at it from that big early stage and say, this is what I want. I want to be the best player in the world. I want to win a Paralympic medal. I want to go to the Paralympics. I would feel overwhelmed. So what I did is I focused on what I could do each day to make myself better. I looked at incremental gains. Every day, what was it that I could do to be better? And what I loved about sport is that sport gives you an opportunity to every day be a better person than you were the day before, you know, through your training. And I've transferred that into my everyday life. I think the most important thing with all these big topics is knowledge is power. First of all, try and arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible from trusted sources. You know, find those sources that you can trust, that are that are legitimate and that are registered. And that's a big problem in this day and age. That's a whole nother topic in itself. And then look at those individual things that you can do. So me, on a personal basis, I've tried to eat less meat. I'm becoming a vegetarian because food waste and eating meat are two of the biggest issues or factors in causing global emissions. You know, so if you could cut down on your food waste, if you can eat less meat, you're playing a part. You're changing the world. You know, I use my car less. I have an electric car, but I use it even less. I only use it when I need to. You know, I understand that energy in cars is a resource that's finite and we should use it wisely. So, you know, I just think there are little gains, little wins that we can go for rather than constantly looking at the bigger picture. So for me, when things go crazy and there's all these big ideas and big issues hitting me, rather than panicking, I get focused. And I look for the small wins, the things that I can do. Like, what do they do? What do they call it? Oh my God. Now I'm going to forget the term. Yeah, control the controllables. That's it. You know, I can't control what's happening on the other side of the world, but I can control what's happening in my life.
Ade, thank you so much, Ade, for your time. Really, really genuinely fascinating and thoroughly enjoyed our chat. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, Nick. Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Take care.